I think if you look at what governments are doing today, they're already telling these large corporations that they've got to give users more choice. And now with that, blockchain is the natural alternative in my mind that gives the users that ability to show to any corporation that this choice is mine. I allow you to use my products, my data, or I don't allow you to do that. Or if I do allow you to do it, I do it for some kind of reward on my behalf. That's, I think, something that will have to change in the coming years.
Yeah, very interesting conversation here. I think I'm probably a little bit more towards the government is going to screw this up side of this. So I don't have that faith that ultimately the big tech companies will yield to government influence, although they could use these platforms that are enabled in a way to provide data provenance to get a few steps in the right direction, right? I think it's going to take every solution on the spectrum to probably solve that particular problem. There's, as you know, I'm sure there's tons of, as we all know, there's tons of problems with the data provenance argument. Although you brought up governance slightly, I think governance is one of the areas where decentralization can really do a lot of good for AI in particular. And this is because everyone's talking about alignment and control, right? Everyone's talking about this problem. All the media can talk about is how AI is going to kill us all, which is why I always crack that nice little friendly joke, right? But the reality is, tons of people want to work on the alignment and control problem. There's going to be a response. We're going to work on that problem. But ultimately, every centralized argument for that decays in the same way. It all decays to, but who ends up controlling the control system? So if that's Google, we're still screwed, right? If that's Amazon, if that's Facebook, we're still screwed. Right? No offense to all of you who work with Facebook. So here we can see where the experiment of do we have an exact answer in the decentralized world yet for the alignment and control problem being decentralized? No, but it is the place we want to go, right? In the same way that democracy is a grand experiment. How long has democracy been being tested and refined now, right? Democratic institutions have been around for roughly 2,000 years. We've been trying this experiment. Does anyone know of a perfect democracy? Like, no, right? But would you rather have the CCP controlling us here in the United States, right? No, also no, right? So most people actually challenge me that decentralization will have anything to do with the alignment and control problem. They're thinking of it purely from an engineer's standpoint, right? Ultimately, even if the engineers get perfect control, right, the problem decays to, well, who's calling the shots, right? That should be something that is decentralized and governed by the people who are at the other end of the AI, who are being controlled by the AI.
And it sounds like we're a ways from that being solved. What do you think is going to be, do you see something as being kind of the first thing you think that will really have a big impact at the intersection of AI and crypto?
Well, tough to answer that question. Like AI and crypto are both moving really, really fast.
Probably payments, I think, is probably the one that gets the most ink.
Yeah, I mean, look, everybody talks about crypto. You know, crypto is the payment engine for AI, right? Like that seems to be an obvious thing. If you look at fiat-based monetary systems, they require personhood, right? Even if you're a corporation, they require personhood. They require that you follow a set of rules. These things don't necessarily lend themselves to becoming a world of open source AI, right? Anybody's going to be able to spark up tons of stuff that might impact the world at the speed of computation and AI. That's not going to be done in fiat, right? It just can't be, right? The governments can't allow that, and I understand why they can't. So what's the natural alternative? Crypto's already there, right?
Yeah, I'm just to piggyback on that a little bit. I'd say, when you're at places like Instagram Meta, you can only support the payment for so many creators out there. It's not a scalable system. Being able to make wire deposits and bank payments to these creators is something that's, onerous and something that doesn't scale, unfortunately. So crypto really is the only answer toward rewarding those customers fairly. I mean, I think I appreciate the skepticism around like, will these big companies do it? One thing to point out is that we've actually made a partnership with Microsoft, we announced pretty recently, where they're going to be the ones that'll help work with us on this problem and investigate how do you start to generate this, where user generated content gets that problem gets put into these training models, feeds into OpenAI systems and training and inference and serving, and start to bootstrap that flywheel of products that will start to be the next generation, ideally, consumer applications that people look towards that leverage this technology. Hopefully that will actually spawn this cycle of where we see a change in the way that data is controlled by those centralized entities.
Yeah, I would love to see more of that corporate movement in that direction, but I don't know. I mean, still skeptical. I'd rather give all of that to open source and maybe the stability AI model, right? I think they're doing a better job of that.
Yeah, I think the other point that we just spent some here today was working on a product called Maps, which was like the Web3 for waves, right? And I think that's another great example of where user-generated content, whether you're putting in reviews for different places, different gas station prices, is a really good opportunity for good training sets and also good rewards for that data. And ultimately, over time, if we as consumers decide to choose that these are the systems we want to use, and we want to be rewarded for our usage, and we want them to be open, that data will eventually grow larger than the purpose that these closed source corporations have around us, and can hopefully help us to move that needle forward.
Yeah. As a counterpoint, there will always be a group of users that fall into that category. I think the vast majority of users will probably have something like Rewind.ai attached to them 24/7, won't have any idea how any of this stuff works, won't even care, and will probably fall into the bucket of like, just make it easy, my AI tells me what to do. And they're going to need to be structurally protected as much as we can. But many of them will just end up in the Google, or whoever. I'm picking on Google here, guys. I'm not anti-Google. Just insert any large corporation. It should actually be a compliment that I keep saying Google. They're obviously the big bad boy on the block.
I mean, I think we'll just have to, our job is really to help companies like Google also join the forces with us. But ultimately, I think the important thing is the user experience has to be great. I mean, you kind of hit that, right? Like, if we have a great user experience, if the costs are nearly free or almost free, and you're getting more value from those products than you would get at a Google or that others offer, either they're going to have to go ahead and use those methods that we're excited about, or those products are going to win. So I think that as we see crypto start to develop into, it looks like Web 2, but it's really Web 3. And you're just getting benefits and additional utility out of it. I think we've done a good job at Aptos, like where we have about a second or so latency. It's an internet-like experience, where it's very, very cheap. It's like very below a cent for every transaction. You can start to see how a company like Facebook or others starts to put billions and billions of data points on it at extremely low cost. And that's where I think we can move the tide forward. But it's got to be the infrastructure change that happens to make the experience as internet-like as possible.
You
totally agree.
you mentioned about consumers liking something. Do you have any sense on where we are in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think consumers love the internet today, right? Like the internet today has been optimized, for decades and decades, right? Like there's so many great products out there that we all use on a daily basis. And the issue is that Web3 is just, we've seen infrastructure fail. We've seen user experience either be batched or behind the scenes, so it's not like Web3 in your face. And because of that, I think that's really held back that user journey. If you can, again, transact, the same way you would through your online bank account, and you can use the same things, buy a product on Amazon with one click, and you can do that with a blockchain. And now it's going to provide you additional utility because it's using payment methods that are scalable to everyone as opposed to a small few. And it's also being able to be accessible to everyone, I think, and it's composable with other protocols and products. That's where that additional utility will actually bring the traction that we'd like to see. forth.
Yeah, and here's where the table kind of turns here, and AI saves decentralization rather than the other way around. The future of accessing Web3 technology is talking to an LLM or something similar like anything else, and not even realizing that there's any decentralized tech behind this. It is zero touch. Do you know if your trades are stored in Postgres or Mongo or Hadoop, or do any of you know? No, right? Nobody knows. And we're all techie people, right? And so until this stuff becomes invisible, it's not going to become ubiquitous. When it's invisible, it will be ubiquitous. And so here, AI can do a lot to make Web3 technology easy to use, and things like contact your developer and integrate the SDK. No one will ever say that again, right? Talk to the LLM and it will build the Web3 project for you. It will seamlessly integrate Web3 technology that you don't even know exists, right? That's the future of decentralized. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience for like 10 minutes. And then both you guys will stick around afterwards if folks have other questions.
Oh yeah, happy to answer questions.
Yeah, that's appreciated. This is my last one. What's kind of the biggest misconception that you think people have about the intersection of crypto and AI, or what don't people know that they should?
Yeah, I can start off with this one. I think the biggest misconception, is that somehow AI is going to be leveraging, like, the ZK proofs are going to work in some massively trained, with billions of parameters server model. Like, that's just not going to work in your time, in the near future. Like, these algorithms are going to be, work on high performance computing. So before I worked in data infrastructure, I worked in high performance computing at places like Sandia, Los Alamos, and Argonne for many years, and seeing like a lot of the supercomputers, working on some of the world's largest supercomputers, as well as in the United States. And those systems, have so much compute power. Like, it's just amazing. There's no way, unfortunately, unless you have 100 times that compute power, you're going to see the kind of, formal, proofs that can say like, well, I'm sure this was generated exactly the same way.
And this is serious. How does that compute power compare to what you experienced at Facebook?
Actually, overall, I'd say Facebook's probably a lot more flops, right? But the thing is that in terms of being like very optimized, like supercomputing is not just about pure CPU power. It's also about the networking, the storage systems. I also work on storage. These things all have to work in tandem to kind of do things like nuclear simulations, which probably worked at Sandia. Much way safer way to do nuclear experiments. And so I think people often think like there's where does AI and Web3 intersect? It's really, I think, at the boundary. Again, it's where the data comes into the network. How do we track that? How do we provide reward incentive systems for that? And how do we even think about things like federated learning, where you have institutions like health organizations that want to go share data between other organizations and be rewarded for that fairly, but not revealing necessarily private information about those users and about us, right? Like, that's not something we want to have happen. I think that it's just a hard reality, but that's just the way it's going to work. Where training is also not going to be necessarily deterministic. It happens in these massively parallel systems where there's a lot of moving components, processes, sending messages back and forth. It's not repeatable. That's the other thing. You can have approximate verification, which is less, again, mathematically correct. You can get hints of things that where the data was used for this particular model for inference and querying and sorting under that, but it's not going to be part of the core training.
So the accountants are going to hate the not repeatable, but the lawyers are going to love it.
The lawyers always win.
That's yeah, totally agree. So I give a kind of an answer from a different perspective. I think the number one thing I see almost everybody getting wrong is timing, which is they're overestimating the impact of this technology and this intersection now, and they're underestimating it in the long term. So this is a fundamental human trait, and it is really showing itself off right now. I run into project after project after project every day that is, wow, we're gonna do this and we're gonna solve this and the impact is gonna be amazing and we're gonna be done in 3 months and I'm like, okay, you're not gonna make that impact in 3 months, right? That's not gonna happen. Now, all of us grinding on this for a few years, and that's gonna be transformative, fundamentally transformative. But that is gonna take some time, and you cannot predict when those paradigm shifts will actually take hold. So I think the number one thing I see is just they're getting the timing wrong.
Okay, thanks. So, questions from the audience? Raise your hand. Any? Thank you.
So thank you for sharing all your insights. You mentioned federated learning, and in a context, we've been trying to play with how do you leverage distributed ledger technologies and blockchains to share learning sets, to share the learning models, and then also to be able to rewind and go back to the ones that worked, especially when they fail. We've got a lot of stuff in Sandbox and stuff we've been playing with, but we haven't found any stable way to do that. So I don't know if you have any insights or tips or tricks that you can share and how to really drive true federated learning and how to do that at scale.
That's a great question. I mean, the details of exactly how we're going to do federated learning at scale are challenging, and it really depends on the use case, right? I think you can imagine, aggregated data sets that produce approximate data is one way, obviously, right? So if you just give like a study of patients that contracted COVID in a certain time frame, we can do that without necessarily revealing my personal information or your personal information. The other way that's interesting, though, is we start to even build, I think this is where data groups get interesting. You can actually build data groups around like what data is included in a set. And then as long as you then reveal that confidential information only to those that are training at that time, you can kind of maybe prove inclusion, approximate inclusion, between those two parties, and making sure, again, that those certificates kind of are stored on chain. The proofs are stored on chain, and then the verification can be done, of course, whenever people feel like it. So there's some interesting applications there.
Yeah. So in the short term, I'm not a big fan of breakthroughs in federated learning. I think it's unpredictable when we're going to get something like liquid neural networks or something that will, something that's a game changer that says, now we can do these techniques now. We just can't predict when that's going to happen. I mean, there are people smarter at this than me. There are people in organizations that I work with that are smarter at this than me, but I haven't seen any evidence that any of these techniques are going to be efficient enough to beat centralized solutions anytime soon. That's not to be discouraging that this problem should be worked on. Absolutely should be worked on. But when is there going to be a breakthrough? That's a lot of fundamental research there.
Yeah. I think in terms of algorithms, you might be right. But in terms of the additional data being provided and that data sharing being useful for those companies to do training, inference, and serving, I think there is a lot of applications there. And that doesn't require anything magical.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
I know, Eric, you mentioned government at the beginning of the talk. So I was curious, crypto has been around for well over 15 years now, and at least in the US, we still don't have common sense regulation. So how do you see that evolving, or what do you think is going to happen to the regulation with respect to AI?
Governments are going to screw it up, but I'm not making any magical prediction there that anybody doesn't know. It's really a question of how far behind they're going to get and how bad they're going to screw it up, right? So that's usually the question. I think this is going to be exponentially more complex than previous attempts at regulating tech, which has already gone poorly. Because of the emergent properties of these systems, how fast everything is moving. I mean, geez, guys, just look at Hugging Face and the stuff Stability is doing and the stuff all of you great engineers are doing and Aptos is doing and other networks, this is moving really fast. Government's not going to be able to catch it or catch it in any sensible way. So the question is just how much they will inhibit it and mess around with it. And you can see that playing out in crypto. Now the problem here is that in crypto, this is losing the United States the hegemony it once had in this industry, right? We once controlled, as a country, the vast majority of the crypto mindshare. Now that's bleeding out of the country very, very, very quickly to all sorts of places all over the world. That cannot happen for AI. So that is actually one big difference is the DoD complex, the military, the government is aware that AI is a national security problem. They're aware of that already. So they're not going to do the same kind of nonsensical stuff. So I can say that. They're not going to do what they're doing with crypto. You will see them take action on AI. Now, I don't think it will be the right actions, but they have much more of an impetus to get this correct because of the national security standing and because of the fact that, if you know any generals, joint chiefs of staff, et cetera, they're all screaming loud about this. None of them are screaming about crypto, right? They're all screaming about AI.
Yeah, I think I would disagree with anything you said, but I think the one hope we have is, ironically, I think the privacy laws in Europe, I think are good, interesting, like that changed the way I think all of the companies in America started to think about what they do to maintain data in their systems, changed a lot of the infrastructure here in tech companies in America. And I think that change, ironically, might help us get faster adoption of Web3, giving consumers more choice around how their data is being used, being preserved, and that ultimately will hopefully lead towards not only responsible AI, but adoption of Web3 and technology, crypto technology in general.
I had a question. We were talking about this the other night. So can you talk about a little bit about data protection? Because what I see more and more is, you could see a deep fake of a Tom Cruise video, but I'm starting to see like deep fakes of data lakes out there. And then that's published as use this data set, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe talk about how the intersection of crypto and AI can help safeguard that a little bit.
Well, I guess I'll take the first shot. I've actually been working on this problem since I got into crypto in 2010. So this is something I know a lot about. I come from the security world. I've built disinformation defense platforms several times now. This is going to be a very important use case at the intersection of AI and crypto. The generative AI will get to a point, and I would argue stability has already driven it to that point, where deep fakes will become the norm for just about everything. You can already see it's a large part of YouTube. For those of you who don't watch YouTube Shorts has been largely taken over in the last just 2 months by deepfakes. You now really cannot tell the shorts you're looking at whether they're deepfakes or not, and a large percentage of them are. So just in 2 months, it's disrupted YouTube, guys. So if Google can't control that, we have a problem, Houston, right? So this is absolutely one of the key things at the intersection of AI and crypto. We need something like what, I don't know if any of you know Alex Kahana, he's a big promoter of this kind of thing. We've talked a lot about this. He calls it time chain. I won't steal his name. I don't know if someone used it before him, but we've been working on this concept for a very long time. I've built it into several networks now, including the Manifest Network, which one of my organizations built. where we're sequencing, we're building the infrastructure to sequence truth as it happens, and then instantiate that in a blockchain as a tamper-resistant artifact. If we do not get to that point, then, we won't be able to tell a month from now what even happened here, right? Because there will be 20 deep fakes of me saying stuff I didn't say, right?
Avery?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. It is probably one of the best uses for blockchain out there, honestly, right? So, if Eric's talking here tonight and he says something on a quote and he wants to post it on TikTok, right? If he was able to sign that with his private key, and now that the content proliferates to other platforms like Instagram or to YouTube Shorts, and you're able to verify the content again with that same key, no one can take it, modify it, and then pretend that they're Eric saying a slightly different thing. And that's something where you have a blockchain that is, again, very scalable, very cheap, provides infrastructure at speed. You can actually provide this guarantee today, and it's something that's not very far from the future. It's really on us as consumers as well as those large platforms to go ahead and adopt this technology, which is already ready for prime time.
Cool.
I could talk about that one forever. Yeah, it's very.
So my question is for Avery. So in regards to the Microsoft partnership, which is really exciting with Aptos, a lot of the time where we hear like Fortune 500 companies building on blockchain is private chains. Can you speak a little bit more to why they selected a public chain and why they're bullish on that?
That's a great question. And so I think this is a very, very long question. I think, which is why do people start to build on private chains in general? I think is the first starting point. There's a lot of reasons for that. One is, I think in the ETH land, obviously, Ethereum, very centralized, very well trusted in that space, but unfortunately not able to perform at a very high throughput, a little expensive. And so as you kind of build up these networks, that can kind of scale it out in terms of performance, in terms of cost, like that's kind of the main driver of those solutions going forward. When you think about financial institutions, it may be regulatory or legal concerns, not just the performance aspects. But when you think about a chain that can actually handle that scales like the cloud, like the way you can spin up and spin down its single resources, keeps costs consistent over time, supports fault tolerance in multiple regions or different countries. That's what Aptos, I think, and other high performance and low latency chains should look like. And so when you have that, you don't really need this other infrastructure unless there's other considerations like legal or regulatory. And that's what Microsoft's looking at. They're looking at their massive scale of what they do in gaming or what they do in GitHub even, the developers there, or their products that they produce like Office 365 and others. Thinking about, again, what can we do to add decentralization into the mix, whether it's going to be related to AI, whether it's related to payments or other parts of their business. They're really interested in financial services infrastructure, having worked with almost all of the Fortune 500 companies out there. That's what they're interested in right now. And I don't think it matters whether it's public or private because Aptos can support all those workloads very easily. But there may be use cases in those sectors, in the finance space specifically, where a private blockchain is needed for us to make forward progress in a meaningful way. Thanks.
Okay. I'll let Eric take the last question. Again, they'll hang out afterwards.
Thanks.
Answer any more questions.
So the writer strike just ended, and one of the big issues was when creative work is trained on by AIs, and there should be the capability to tokenize those creative inputs, but creators get paid instantly. Where are you seeing the state of this art right now? Who's doing that? Is anyone doing it? Is Aptos uniquely suited for that?
That's a wonderful question. We actually were meeting. Mo and I actually met down in LA with someone who's very closely related to that work, and thinking about again how do actors kind of retain their ownership of their own identity, given that the way these contracts are written, the structure is so heavily towards the studio owning every part of their content and production value. I think that's going to be really I think negotiation probably with like larger organizations like the Screen Actors Guild and others to kind of help get better controls around that. But that's where blockchain could help, right? We started training, for instance, even a character like Iron Man on all the lines of dialogue that are said in movies or in scripts and comic books. Who owns those rights? That's also very, very interesting. I think hopefully that as we start to again have that content being owned by different entities, and has given me able to proceed in terms of, if you use my content without my permission, that's a violation of law kind of thing. Those content writers and content creators will be able to reap rewards from that or prevent their data from being used in ways that are not authorized over time.
Yeah, this is also related to the previous discussion of and disinformation defense. Structurally, these are very similar problem sets. So the groups working on disinformation defense will probably have a leg up here as well. They're used to identifying information, giving credit to it, verifying it, and looking for slight derivative works of it, right? So you have to do all of those things in disinformation defense as well. So you might see some overlap in those tool sets and in those teams that are doing that sort of work.
So look, Avery, Eric, this was awesome. Let's give him a big hand.